quite a few of them.
Recording in progress.
Oh,
Awesome.
You've been recording us?
I just started, so all the other stuff, all the other crimes that you guys talked about were not recorded, so that's good.
Okay.
So everything from here on out, don't talk about any more crimes. Especially you, Patty, all that stuff you've been conspiring about. We won't tell anyone.
I'll try to stuff it down.
Yeah, stuff it, yeah. Nice. Well, Father, thank you just for a night that we could enjoy cooler air, crisp mornings, and just enjoy your creation in a different kind of way that we've been enjoying it for months on end.
Get in there.
As we come out of a season where we are just asking for rain and coolness, and we're sick of it being dry and hot all the time, please just give us a constant reminder that that Jesus is the true living water that we seek for in life, and he fulfills us. So give us a reminder of that tonight as we dive into John 7 and 8. Pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Well, today will be fun. Hopefully, last week I had iPad issues, so I went and re-downloaded a bunch of stuff and all that. So hopefully that's not a problem anymore. So you guys are gonna have to tell me if allow, that's all new stuff. Allow for 1 month. Okay, we'll say for a month. If the screen stops moving, or if I'm talking about another text that's not on the screen, let me know, because it was freezing up last week. Usually it shows me that that's happening, but hopefully it won't be a problem this week. Let me move stuff around on my screen so I can see everyone. See the chat. Get that up. So when Yolanda pipes in, because she won't talk to real people, I see how it is, Yolanda.
That is not true.
That is so true. This isn't even you. No, you're AI right now. I don't even believe it's you.
Oh my gosh, I'm in a volleyball gym right now.
Hopefully this isn't one of the ones you're coaching at.
Absolutely not. It's the one that I'm watching, which is almost worse.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. Well, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Cool. We'll go through John 7 and 8. Lots of stuff happening in here. So we're not going to get through every verse, but we're going to hit some really cool passages. And some of this tonight is some of my favorite sections of the Gospel of John. And it's because this is stuff that once we start figuring out like the background of what's happening in the text, it really just comes alive. And so what we're going to want to do is keep in mind the passages we're in for the next couple weeks. If you guys remember, while we've been in the Gospel of John, it's broken up chapters 1 through 12 and then 13 through 21. Those are the two divisions of John. Remember the stuff that we're just reminding ourselves of every week. Chapters 1 through 12, we could say it's, part A. The next one is part B. Part A is all about the book of signs. That's what scholars often refer to it as. John doesn't refer to it as that, but there's all these signs that we see pop up. And then chapters 13 through 21 is what's known as the book of glory, because this is really speaking about the glorification of Jesus. So in the book of signs, what we've seen so far is we have this beautiful interlude, prelude that we saw in, not an interlude, a prelude that we saw in the first 18 verses of the book. And this highlights who Jesus is. It gives us all these identifications, almost poetic, like we talked about, how there's these strophes, these stanzas that lay out who Jesus is and how he is the true light, but then the world is dark. And all the stuff that we've already started to see play out through the Gospel of John. So John gives us this intro there. In the first couple chapters, in chapters 2, 3, and 4, we see how John engages the life of Jesus with the institutions of Judaism. So we looked at, wedding ceremonies and the temple and those sorts of things, like the things that identify who you are. And even like you think about institutions, all things have institutions. There's the institutional side of things, a couple weeks ago, I was very much having my first world problems of grieving the Oakland A's. And part of like I was telling my wife, part of grieving the Oakland A's leaving as a fan of 41 years of my life. I've been going there since I was, like 5 years old. It was grieving the Oakland A's, the concept of this team, but then also it was the Coliseum, this place that I've been going to for 41 years of my life, for A's games, for Raider games, for all these events, right? And so that's the place is like the institution of the thing. It's not the thing itself, because the A's could go on and play anywhere, but that was its own thing. And like we talked about last week, we started getting introduced to the festivals now of Judaism. So we saw that in chapter 5 with the Sabbath, and then last week with Passover in chapter 6. You have the feasts and the festivals. And those are, like, even to bring it back to a sports analogy, those are things that happen in a sports environment as well. When I had Raider season tickets, part of the deal was, okay, the game might start at 1, but we know we're going to get there at 7 a.m. because at 7 a.m. is when the parking lots open up. And we're going to get in there, and we have, like, we had about 8 people in our season ticket group. And so I had my truck that I drove that had all our crap in it. And then we had another big car that most of the people drove in. And so we would get there, we would park in the spot we liked, the side we liked to park on, the 66th Avenue side of the Coliseum. And then we would set up everything, and we had, everyone had their way of setting it up. Like, I'm responsible for this, and this guy's responsible for that. And then we would have a little generator and a satellite and a TV. And so we figured out how to get the satellite, and we could watch the morning game while we cooked breakfast, and we made food, and we would bring like checkers, and we would just bring stuff. We'd bring cards, dominoes, and we would just be in the parking lot from like 8 a.m. until noon. And then we know at noon we have to pack up everything, and then we go into the game. And so this is part of the festival of attending the event, right? These are just the things that go along with that. And how, like, the first time someone said, hey, we have something going on, we can't tailgate before the game. It's like, how do you go to the game and not tailgate? Who just wants to go and just get there for the game? It's one of those things. It's part of the festival of the activity. And so we want to think about what are the festival things that were happening in Judaism that we might just not know about because we're not part of this world. And John is assuming that his hearers, his audience, they know these things. And so he's not filling in the gaps, where for us, we kind of need to explain these things. So when Mateo gets older and I start telling him, if he ever gets into sports, because he's into Minecraft and Pokemon right now, right? If he ever gets into sports and wants to talk about my experiences going to Raider games, it's not merely going to be the games. And there's certain games I'll tell him about that are like, dude, I remember being at this game when this happened. And but I'll also tell him about the things, because I have to explain the things. I have to explain the festival of it, because he's not going to know that. Whereas when I talk with my buddies, who I'm still friends with, all these guys who 25 years ago we had Raider season tickets, we don't have to bring up do you remember how we used to tailgate? It's like, no, it's part of the thing that we all know about. So we want to get more into that mindset of understanding the background and the culture, because that's going to help these texts come alive, especially when it comes to the feasts. And so for this week and next week, I think it's next week. Let me make sure. What's the outline say? It's week 7 or week 6. Yeah. So this week and next week, we're going to be looking at a lot of these festivals. So you just kind of want to remember where we're at, and we'll remind of some of these details because they're going to bleed over for next week as well. But one of the major festivals that we're going to see tonight in chapter 7 is what's known as the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. If anyone has any Jewish friends, do you know what like the Jewish name of this is, what it's called? You guys familiar with this at all? Can't hear. If you know it, go ahead and shout it out. I don't have to give all the answers. Oh, Nancy, it looks like you're talking, but you're muted.
It's Sukkot. It's the Feast of the Sukkot.
Feast of the Sukkot. Very good. And what's interesting in terms of the calendar year, it changes because it's based on a lunar year. Do you know this year when it's celebrated? Might have put it. I forgot if I put it in your guys' notes or not. So it might be no, I put it in my notes. It's actually celebrated starting tomorrow. So this is timely because we're reading in the Gospel of John this festival that was celebrated 2,000 years ago. And it's still being practiced by Jewish folks today. And it's actually going to be tomorrow through the 23rd. So it will be a week-long celebration starting. And yeah, I'm curious, maybe it starts sundown. I actually should have checked on this. I wonder if they're actually celebrating it right now, because if it starts on the 16th, I don't know if it's sundown tonight or sundown tomorrow, but it could very well be celebrated right now because it's sundown tonight. So this is let's pretend it is, just because that makes the study so much more magical, right? So we're going to pretend that they're celebrating this right now, because that will make it cool for this study. So it's the Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Booths. Sukkot is the other name for it. Sukkot, however you pronounce it. This is it's celebrating the thing that people are anticipating, and it's celebrating what has been happening all summer. And so you have the Jewish agricultural year beginning in the spring. And so that's when you're going to be preparing for everything. You're going to be planting seeds. We see the same thing happening living in Oakley. We have all these grape fields, right? And what do we start seeing if you're driving down Rose, or if you're driving down Laurel, or these places that have all these grape fields, right? The grape fields literally right behind my house on Carpenter. I share a fence with that. You guys know on Carpenter Road by Almond Grove Elementary. But like, I literally live in a house that my fence backs up against that vineyard. And so it's going to be in the spring, the time of the year where you're starting to get ready for things. You're going to be planting. You're going to be doing that. It rains in the spring. You get your rains in March and April. And then all summer, you're having a drought. Nothing is growing. And so you're waiting for things to grow into the fall. But this is also the time of the year during Sukkot where stuff might be blooming, stuff might be budding, cereals and different grains that they're growing. It's probably going to be popping up around now in the Middle East. And so what you would do is they would go out and they would build, little temporary huts, houses, booths in the fields to protect the fields at night from animals or from people who are trying to steal stuff. And so since they were doing that, they used this as an opportunity to remember living in the wilderness, because there's imagery for everything. And so that's how the Feast of Tabernacles comes about. You even see this in talked about in anyway, Old Testament stuff. I'm trying to not go on too much of a tangential thing because we have so much to get over. But oftentimes in Judaism, you see agricultural things and just life events being used as opportunities to talk about life, to talk about your own history. And this is what's happening with the Jewish people in the first century. They had been practicing this in the same way where every year at Passover, you spend time talking about what happened with the Passover. You continue on, and it involves food and festivals and those sorts of things. So they're staying in these temporary homes, and they would spend time talking about the tabernacle, which it's not the same thing as a temple, although it serves a similar purpose. In the Old Testament, we see that the dwelling place of God is going to be, it's a special place, right? It's a special presence that is on display. The first time we see the dwelling place of God is in the Garden of Eden. It's in Genesis 1 and 2. It's God living with his people in an unfiltered sort of way. And so we could say the first temple is the Garden of Eden. We could say the last temple is Revelation 21 and 22. It's the New Jerusalem. It's the one seated on the throne and the Lamb sitting at the center of the city. And there's not even a need for a light because their radiance is so great and everyone is surrounding them. That's the ultimate temple is what we see in Revelation 21 and 22. The first temple is the Garden of Eden. Well, obviously when you have the fall in Genesis 3, God is omniscient. He's in all places at all times, but he's removing his presence in the special way that Adam and Eve had access to in the garden, where he could walk with them. He could use the language of dwelling with them, which remember we've looked at that language so far. Look at how Jesus is the one dwelling with the world now. And so dwelling is one of the hallmarks of what God does with his people. He dwells with them, and that's a special thing. And that's when you have a temple. So what do you see in the Old Testament story? God's presence manifests itself in a special kind of temple way in various times. In Genesis 12 and 15 and 17, when he has encounters with Abraham to talk about the covenant, right? You see this in different ways where he just engages with people. You see this then in Exodus chapter 3. Moses leaves Egypt and he goes to Sinai, or the mountain. Is that on Sinai as well, or is that a different mountain? And he has the encounter with the burning bush. What's so special about that burning bush? Nothing. 5 minutes before this thing became holy and Moses had to remove his feet, this was a regular bush that animals were defecating in, and it was just a bush, right? Why is it holy now? Because the presence of God is here in a special kind of way, in a different kind of way. When you see the rest of the Exodus story, how does God dwell with his people? It's, a pillar of fire or pillar of smoke. He's dwelling with them in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle as well. And that's what they carry with them all the way until the time when they build the temple. So the tabernacle is different than the temple. They're not the same things, although they serve the same purpose. So you have this tabernacle, a temporary setup for God's dwelling, where his special presence is dwelling. And this happens all the way until Solomon, who actually built the temple in Jerusalem. And now you have a temple of God, the presence of God there in a certain way. This is why when you fast forward to Jesus, build this, we looked at this in John 2, destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll raise it up. Oh, but he was talking about the temple of his body. Why? Because he is the manifestation of God. Okay, so he becomes this new temple or this new tabernacle, if you will. If we fast forward through the New Testament, what do we see Paul write in places like 1 Corinthians 3 and 6, and I think 2 Corinthians 6 as well, that you all, the people of God, you are the temple of God because you contain collectively the Spirit of God. And so this is this thing where we become temples, or we become tabernacles in a sense. So the thing is, there's a difference between temple and tabernacle, and there's a purpose for the tabernacle. And this festival that they're going to have, the Feast of Booths or Feast of Tabernacles, is celebrating that time when God's people lived in the wilderness, where God's presence was among them out there before they had land in temporary shelters. This is time where they don't have water because you're living in the wilderness. But guess what? God provides water. And you see that in 1 Corinthians 10, where that idea of that rock that you see in the Pentateuch story, that you see in the beginning and the end of Moses' life, where God said, hey, speak to this rock and it'll give you water. And he hid it, so he got in trouble. But it's like, you suppose that they carried this rock with them and that provide water. And guess what? Paul says, and this rock was Christ, is what he says. So even you see this Christological reading of the Egypt story. And so you have even this dry place, you have water coming from a rock. You have the wilderness, that it's not a city. So you don't have any light at night other than what you can provide. And other than this pillar of fire that is providing hope, because that's the presence of God. And so, this is wilderness imagery and all the symbolism that exists there. You also have murmuring and grumbling and complaining that happens in that story, which we've already seen that with the religious leaders. We talked about that last week or the week before. And you have these people who are divided, who's following God's will and who wants to turn back to Egypt and do the Egypt way. So these are all things in the background of what we're seeing. And I think John is, I don't want to say retelling the story, but he's looking at the lens of Judaism and the festivals of Judaism. And he's saying, and Jesus fulfills all of these things that you guys have been practicing. We don't need to look backwards anymore. Let's look forward. So that's what we're going to see tonight as we start in chapter 7. So after this, and obviously after this is, going back to what we went through all last week, so we don't need to recap that. After this, Jesus went about in Galilee. He did not wish to go about in Judea because the Jews were looking for an opportunity to kill him. So he's already causing an issue. And remember, geographically, Galilee is going to be up in the north. Now, the Jewish festival of booths was near. So his brother said to him, leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples also may see the works you are doing. For no one who wants to be widely known acts in secret. So right now it's talking about his brothers. This is probably talking about his earthly brother. So this isn't like the Christianese way of speaking in terms of like his Christian brothers. This is talking about his literal brothers, the other offspring of Joseph and Mary. And remember, at this point, his brothers are not followers of him. Even James, who writes the letter of James, like we know they're not his believers. They're very much in the darkness at this point, that we know, that we could read into the story. And so, hey, if you want to make a name for yourself, go to the big city. Just like we would tell any kid who wants to, if you have the kid who is the theater major and they're like, hey, I want to study acting and I want to be a big star. We don't say, well, then you know what? You should really go to the University of Montana. University of Montana might have a fine theater program, but what would we say? Hey, you need to go to LA. You need to go to New York. You need to go, if you want to be on Broadway, go to Broadway, right? And this is what his brothers are saying. Like, hey, if you think you're the Messiah and you think you're the big deal, go to Judea, go to Jerusalem, go to where all the religious leaders are going to be, because that's who you need to have on your side. And you're not going to do this stuff in secret. So if you do these things, show yourself to the world, for not even his brothers believed him. So Jesus said to them, my time has not yet come, which is interesting. It's not using the hour language yet, but it's the same kind of idea. But normally he was like, my hour is not here. But same thing. My time has not yet come, but your time is always here. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify against it, that its works are evil. Go to your festival yourselves. I am not going to this festival, for my time has not yet fully come. After saying this, he remained in Galilee. So remember, what did we also see last week when he fed the large group of people? They wanted to make him king, but it's the king they wanted to have. It's not the king that he actually was. Sorry, let me rearrange my desk here. So just as I'm looking through my notes to make sure I'm not missing anything on my end because of ADDs. Okay, we're good. So going on. But after his brothers had gone to the festival, then he also went, not publicly, but as it were in secret. So he is doing things in secret. He's continuing to do things in secret because it's not his time yet. And this is a theme you see throughout the Gospels in various ways. In Mark's Gospel, what do we constantly see? He does this awesome thing and he's like, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. It's the secret Messiah thing. It's not time for people to figure me out. So the Jews were looking for him at the festival, saying, where is he? And there was considerable complaining about him among the crowds, while some were saying, he is a good man. Others were saying, no, he is deceiving the crowd. Yet no one would speak openly about him for the fear of the Jews. So he's definitely creating a stir. He's creating a buzz. People know about Jesus and what he's doing. This idea of complaining is that same idea that we see, like I said, in the Old Testament story, just like people were in the wilderness, living in the literal booths, they're murmuring and complaining about how God's not providing and they'd rather be in slavery. Then you still have people complaining here. So you definitely have that Moses Jesus thing that's happening. About the middle of the festival, because remember, like, what do you think? Like, what do you mean, halftime? What do you mean middle of the festival? Remember, the festival's a week long. So this is going to be like, if it started, let's just pretend that it happened to start on a Tuesday night, 2,000 years ago. So this may be like, Friday or Saturday. Oh, might not be Saturday, because if that's the Sabbath, we'll find out. But it's going to be like that length of time. Stuff has been happening. About the middle of the festival, Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. Real quick, we don't want to think of the temple like a church, in that it would be very weird if I just showed up to a church and started preaching. That would be inappropriate. That's a local congregation that owns that building and that sort of thing. The temple would have porticos used in order to where rabbis could teach, and just kind of their followers would follow them there. It'd be very similar to if you've ever done any kind of what's it called? Like a trip, like a group trip where you have a leader, you go on like a overseas trip or something like that. Like Shayla and I, like 10 years ago, we took a group of her AP World History students to Europe on a World War II tour. And so we were like the chaperones. We were in charge of all these kids, but then we hired a leader who was like an expert in stuff. So while we visited all these World War II sites, she was a PhD in history. She was able to tell us about all these things. So we would go to the Churchill Museum, or we would go to Normandy, or we would go to Dachau, the concentration camp, or all these places. And so we were with her, and then she was the one who was educating us, right? And there's all these other tour groups that were doing the same. This is the same type of thing that would happen either in a synagogue or tabernacle or at the temple where rabbis teach their people. So this isn't uncommon. It's not like hijacking someone else's church here. So once again, one of those things that we might called anachronistically read into the text. Anachronism means reading back. You take your own experience and read it back into something. So we just want to make sure we're not doing that. We're not reading this as like a pastor hijacking another church's service or something like that.
And it wouldn't have been like super formal, right? Like, is that what you're trying to get at? It's not like classroom setting. It's like, it's super normal just for somebody to have somebody gather around and have them teach.
Yeah. And hey, Shelby, good to see you, because I didn't think you were going to be here. So thanks for popping in. It's normal that a rabbi would be doing this sort of thing. You're probably going to see the same kind of rabbis there. So it's different when a new rabbi shows up. That's going to be a head shaker. But this is just what happens. Yeah. So this verse 15, the Jews were astonished at it, saying, "How does this man have such learning when he has never been taught?" Because you're going to know where a guy went to school. You're going to know the school he came from, the rabbi who he studied underneath. That rabbi is going to teach in the tradition of his rabbi, and so on. And it's a small town in a sense. The rabbis know who the rabbis are, right? So for a new guy to show up, this is going to be weird. And they know who taught this guy. He shouldn't have all this kind of knowledge. Then Jesus answered them, which is interesting. He was teaching a group of people. He's hearing this mumbling, and so he addresses them. And this is great. "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. Anyone who resolves to do the will of God will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking on my own. Those who speak on their own seek their own glory, but the one who seeks the glory of him who sent him is true, and there is nothing false in him." That's the first part of it. So once again, one of the themes that we've seen throughout John's gospel is the theme of witness. Okay. The testimony of someone. And going back to the concept of the Old Testament, you need the testimony of 2 or 3 credible witnesses. And what do we see with Jesus? He doesn't need anyone to be his witness. He doesn't need anyone's testimony. His testimony is true and credible because he says it is, because God is his witness. And so this is that other sort of thing happening again. It's like, dude, I don't need anyone's, I don't need a degree from Harvard to prove that you need to listen to me. Okay. And so he starts with that. And so then he goes on, verse 19, "Did not Moses give you the law?" And this is also one of those helpful times where we don't want to think of law in terms of like, oh, law bad. No, the law is good. The law is the thing that David says he delights on, that he meditates on day and night. It's helpful a lot of times to, when you see the word law, just read it as Torah, because that's what it's going to be. And the Torah was good. The Torah was the covenant that God made with his people. So did not Moses give you the Torah? And it doesn't, even law here, it doesn't mean law like all the laws you have to obey. Torah, that's the word in Hebrew. It means instruction. It's not merely law, like, oh, don't drive 46 miles an hour on Lone Tree because that's breaking the law. That's not what it's meaning here, right? It's not of rules of do and don't. This is instruction for how to please God. And so we call it law, but that's probably not the best way of describing it. It's much deeper and richer than that. And we just make it a list of rules when we just call it law. And we oftentimes have a false idea of Judaism that, oh, it was just legalism and by rules. No, it wasn't that. It was so much more than that. So didn't Moses give you the Torah? Yet none of you keeps the Torah. Why are you looking for an opportunity to kill me? The crowd answered, "You have a demon. Who is trying to kill you?" Jesus answered them, "I perform one work, and all of you are astonished. Moses gave you circumcision. It is, of course, not from Moses, but from the patriarchs," because it goes back to Abraham. But the idea that had developed is that Moses is the law is, everything originates from Moses. And it's like, dude, Abraham predates Moses. Abraham predates Torah. Okay, which is one of the problems that was happening amongst Israel in the first century is, think about when Jesus is upset at the temple. Hey, religious people, you're keeping people out. You're making it all about you. It's about the ethnocentrism of making Israel the prime deal, and you're not making my house a house of prayer for the nations, or my Father's house a house of prayer for the nations. It's about blessing the entire world, not just one group of DNA people. So guess what? Moses gave you circumcision. Of course, it's not from Moses. It predates him. It's from the patriarchs, from Abraham. And you circumcise a man on the Sabbath. If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath in order that the Torah of Moses may not be broken, are you angry with me because I healed a man's whole body on the Sabbath? Remember, this is going back to the man in the pool. Do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. So the religious leaders are asking questions, and these are good questions. Like, how are you a rabbi? Who sent you? Like, we should ask those questions. Like, there should be a validation of these things. They're not bad questions to ask. But the thing is, his authority doesn't come from rabbis. It comes from heaven. And remember, heaven is synonymous with God. And so you could just imagine that during this interaction, there's going to be a division amongst the people. Who are the people who are on the religious leader side of things, and who are the actual true disciples who are going to be in the light? And this becomes the conflict. I could just imagine sitting there as an audience member who, I'm not even a learned person, and I'm looking at these religious leaders who, you know those phrases like, you need to have more righteousness than the Pharisees. Jesus is like in the Sermon on the Mount. We view that and like, oh, the Pharisees are pieces of crap. No, dude, we would not think that way. We would be like, are you kidding me? I can't be as righteous as the Pharisees. Right? Like, that's what I'm thinking. That's the view I have of the religious leaders. And that's the view we probably would have had of the religious leaders. I'm viewing these people who are in high esteem sociologically within our community. And I see this Jesus guy, this rabbi who also has this thing. I don't know what it is, but I'm into this. And I'm torn between the two. Which side do I pick? And it seems like you got to pick a side. So this is a conflict, and feel the conflict while you're reading this. Don't just say, oh, I obviously would have been the bad guy, or I obviously would have been against the bad guy, and I would have chosen the right team. No, you wouldn't have. And I think I shared this before in an opening class when we talked about reading the Gospels. One of the greatest challenges given to me by a professor in seminary was, when we read the Gospels, we usually read it and put ourselves in the story on the side of Jesus or the disciples. Instead, read the story and put yourself in the side of the religious leaders, because that's probably where we would be. And that's so helpful to read the story, because we always view ourselves in a way better light than we should. And I'm putting myself first in this. I'm not saying you all people need to do this because I've got it figured out. No, I start with me in this, very much so. And it's not in a false sense of humility. It's like, no, that's where I need to be. But that's a better way of reading the story when we're putting ourselves in the story, and not just casting judgment on how these people don't get it. Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten it either. I would have been the knucklehead who would have been in the darkness unless I was brought into the light and drawn by the Father. Moving on. And like, as always jump in if you have any thoughts or questions or virtual tomatoes to throw. Verse 25. Now, some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, is not this the man whom they are trying to kill? And here he is speaking openly, but they say nothing to him. So it's like, they're kind of calling like, do these guys, are they impotent? Or are they scared? Or what's the deal with these guys? Can it be that the authorities really know that this is the Messiah? Yet we know where this man is from, but when the Messiah comes, no one will know where he's from. So it's still this question of, who is Jesus? Who's the identity of him? Is this the Messiah? He can't be the Messiah. We know where he comes from. He comes from Galilee. Messiah is not coming from Galilee. That's like, saying, oh yeah, you don't elect a president or a world leader who comes from, and I'm, like, no one gets excited about I'm trying to think of something that would be relevant, that would be non-offensive. But it's like, man, look at this great innovation coming from Bakersfield. And it's like, no, it's like you hear about, oh, look at this great innovation coming from Silicon Valley. It's from San Jose or from Sunnyvale. You think, oh yeah, great stuff comes from Silicon Valley. Oh, a doctor at Stanford invented a cancer treatment. Let's listen to that. Hey, a doctor at, Bakersfield, Sutter Delta or Sutter Health, I don't even know, a hospital. He invented this thing. I'm going to be like, okay, what is he from Harvard? Where did he go? Like, I care about those sorts of things. This is where one of the darkness thing is going to be. People are just not trusting where Jesus comes from. They're not expecting where he comes from. Because guess what? We know where he's from. So then Jesus cried out as he was teaching in the temple, You know me. I would love to hear this. Is great. He's like he's teaching, and then I just hear him responding to something else. You know me, and you know where I am from. I have not come on my own, but the one who sent me is true. Let's put this here again. Is true, and you do not know him. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. So once again, think back to the prologue of the Gospel of John. Where does he come from? He comes from the Father, right? And he's the only one who's actually seen the Father. Even when we read the text, going back to John 1, my Bible keeps shrinking. The font, that is. The size stays the same. Like in verse 18 of the chapter 1, no one has ever seen God, but the only God who is at the Father's side has made him known. Remember that phrase, made him known, is that Greek word exegesis? He has explained him. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the language here, the Greek language, has the idea of like being in the face of God, like being proximately close to God. Like this is the kind of idea of this is his origins. And so, you know me and you know where I come from. He's not saying you know I come from Galilee. It's like, no, I come from heaven and you should know this. So it's one of those double entendre things. It makes it sound like, oh yeah, you know that I come from Galilee. Nope, I come from somewhere else. My origins are not what you expect, even though you think you know what my origins are. Verse 30. Then they tried to arrest him. Because what is he doing? He's committing blasphemy here. It's either blasphemy or it's true. It's not an ambiguous statement. He is saying, I come from God. And he's even going to get in more hot water as the chapters go on. Yet many in the crowd believed him. So remember, the idea of belief is so central to the Gospel of John. And belief seems to carry that idea, remember, of allegiance. It's not just, oh, okay, this is a good idea. It's, oh no, I'm with him. I'm in the light now. And they were saying, when the Messiah comes, will he do more signs than this man does? So it's like they're believing, but they don't totally get it yet, but they're on board. Oops. That was weird. Next page. Or next slide, verse 32. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering such things about him. And it's even here, they were muttering, they weren't grumbling or moaning. So even like the type of language that's used for the people involved, this is the crowds. They're trying to figure this out. They're not complaining like the religious people were. And the chief priests and the Pharisees sent temple police to arrest him. Jesus then said, I will be with you a little longer, and then I am going to him who sent me. So once again, this is just another blasphemous, ridiculous type phrase. You will search for me, but you will not find me. And where I am, you cannot come. And it is because where is he going? We'll see this in John 17 when we start seeing the glorification language. He wants to be glorified with the Father just as he had that status before he was sent. And no one shares in that glory other than God's self. The Jews said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? Does he intend to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks? What does he mean by saying, you will search for me and you will not find me, and where I am and cannot come? So remember the dispersion, if you're familiar with dispersion, diaspora. See, does it say dispersion in all the translations, or what verse is that in? I just want to see. This is in 35. Where's it at? 35. Dispersion, yeah. Seems to be a pretty common translation. Think of the diaspora, if you've heard of that. Basically, dispersion started happening in 722, I want to say, when the northern kingdom starts being attacked by Assyria in the late 600s and early 580s, working backwards. That's when you have Babylon, who's taking over Judea. In 586 is when the temple was destroyed. And this is known as the dispersion. You either had people who were killed, who were taken to Babylon or Assyria, or you had people who split and bounced. And what you started seeing during this time is there was a dispersion of Israel from the land. And so by this time, there was a huge Jewish population that existed already in the first century in Egypt. There is a huge Jewish population that existed in Rome, obviously, throughout the Roman Empire. Even going back, and this will actually be relevant to what we study about at the end of John chapter 8. Hebrew people, Jewish people had expanded so much over the world, and we'd call it the world. It's not the globe, but the known world at the time, which is going to be basically the Roman Empire. And so starting at about 200 BC, Alexandria, Egypt, which is part of the Roman Empire, and Greek is the language of Egypt. It's the Greek of the Greek and Roman Empire. Actually, it's not part of the Roman Empire in 200 BC, because the Roman Empire hadn't expanded starting till 70 BC, I think. But even then, around about 200 BC, Alexandria, Egypt is like the Harvard of the world. This is where all the intellectuals are going to be at. And the Hebrew Bible was already in existence, and they said, hey, why don't we translate this into Greek? Greek is the common language at the time. Alexander the Great made Greek the language of the world. And so they started translating the Hebrew Bible into Greek. And this is known as the Septuagint, oftentimes abbreviated as LXX, which is the Roman numeral for 70, because it's believed that 70 people were involved in translation process, which is a whole other thing. But Hebrew had already kind of made its way around the world because of this dispersion. And so the idea is like, dude, what's he going to do? Leave Judea and go to just go out to the world and start teaching Greek people? And if he is the Messiah, why isn't he going to be the rabbi to the Messiah, to his people as Messiah? Like, this is basically like, this doesn't really make sense on what he's trying to do. So moving on. On the last day of the festival, remember, this is that festival, Sukkot, booths, tabernacles, whatever you want to call it. It's the great day. And while Jesus was standing there, he cried out, "Let anyone who is thirsty come to me, and let the one who believes in me drink." As the scripture has said, remember, when we see scripture in the New Testament, it's referring to the Old Testament. So he's referring to the Old Testament here. As the scripture has said, out of the believer's heart shall flow rivers of living water. And just even right here, we oftentimes take that passage to mean the believers like Christians. Many scholars think that a better understanding of this and a better translation would be out of the believer's heart, like the person who truly believes, like Jesus, flows rivers of living water. And so that's an alternate way of understanding this. It's like, oh, do rivers of water flow out of me because I believe, or is the source of the living water the true one who believes? If you follow that, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but if you have questions, we could ask. But I think that's an alternate way of understanding this passage, and it makes a lot of sense to be like, oh yeah, Jesus is the true believer, and out of him flows living water, and so drink from him because he's the source of that water. I think that's what's happening here. But the translations make it seem like, and we just automatically read believers as Christians, right? You guys follow me on that? I don't know if you do or not. I don't want to move on if there's questions, if I was confusing. So I'll take a sip of water, and then if not, I'll move on. Now he said this about the Spirit, which believers in him were ready to receive. For as yet there was no Spirit, because Jesus was not yet glorified. It's looking ahead to the future of the story, right? This is one of those things John does, where he's like, he kind of gives peeks to what's going to happen, where other biblical writers don't do that. When they heard these words, some of the crowd said, some of the crowd said, "This is really the prophet." Others said, "This is the Messiah." So there's different identifications, but some asked, once again, they're asking questions, just like we saw with the religious leaders before. They're asking questions, which is good. But some asked, "Surely the Messiah doesn't come from Galilee, does he? Has not the scripture said that the Messiah is descended from David and comes from Bethlehem, the village of where David lived?" So there was a division in the crowd because of him. Some of them wanted to arrest him, but no one laid his hands on him. Hey, Mateo, are you there? He is. Good morning.
Good night.
Good evening. Guten Morgen. Hold you, buddy. Drinking your water.
Good night, Spider-Man.
Elby says, good night, Spider-Man. You just put water all over my thing. All right, and you spit water again. Hey, can you, dude, you're spilling water. Can you close the door, bud? Love you. Okay. Thanks, buddy. See you in the morning. He has water, and he's like, hey, you're going to get in trouble. You know, mom's going to make you sleep out back. Feast of Booths. Okay. So they're trying to guess, who is this guy? What's his identification? And, you know, where is he? Where does he come from? This is the significant thing that we want to look at here, though. What is the question he asks? Who's thirsty? Who wants a drink? So we immediately, in our minds, and I'll use I statements because this is how I think of it because I've been taught, but I'm sure most of us have been thinking this. We're immediately going to think of the spiritual things, right? Oh, I want living water. I want to live forever in heaven when I die, those sorts of things. But what are the people going to be thinking when they hear this? Remember, where are they at right now? It's the great day of the festival, and we don't know what happens on the great day, so we don't know what happens yet. So we don't know why this is significant. But we know this. What time of year is it? It's this time of year. If you haven't stayed up on it through the summer, what do your plants and trees look like right now? We had an issue when we went to Portugal. We did not water our white birches enough. We've been trying to revive them, and guess what? Both our white birches we think are dead. Right? Like things are dry right now. So you don't just get to walk around with your hydro flasks around the great feasts. There's not cooling stations and watering stations. You can't just be like, it's not like when you go to, you know, a fair and there's the booths set up and you could just buy a drink here and there. You might not have any money because most people are poor. Jesus, you're in this environment, you're at a party and it's hot and dry. And he cries out, who's thirsty? Who wants a drink? Dude, me, give me a drink, right? I want this drink. But this is also where things have layers in John's gospel and what Jesus is doing. So there's always going to be something behind what he's saying here. And there certainly is. He's not just talking about physical water. Let's see. I'm trying to see when I want to reveal more stuff. Okay, yeah, this is a good time to do it. So the great day of the feast, what would happen is you would go up to the temple, and every day of the feast, the priests would carry buckets of water, and they would march up and they would be chanting Isaiah 12:3. With joy you will draw water from the wells of salvation. And they would come and they would march up in a procession kind of way, and they would dump water all over the outer courts of the temple. And so they would do this, one time. And on the great day, they would do this multiple times. I think they do this like 7 times. I forget. I don't have it in my notes. I don't think. Yeah, they do it 7 times, where they come in 7 times, they splash this water all around. And this is because in the ancient world, part of your religious practice is demonstrating to God what you want him to do for you. Hey, God, we want water to pour out on our crops. They've been living in a drought. I mean, think about it. For us, we have these elaborate systems of water, and we live in Northern California. It can't rain for a while, but we still have systems and aqueducts and those sorts of things. You don't have that in Jerusalem. If every day it doesn't rain, you're basically living in a drought. And they've had a summer's long drought. So this final day is the big day where they're coming, they're just pouring water. You could just imagine the water overflowing and running down everything, because they've done this 7 times, splashing all this water. This is the imagery that Jesus is using when he's saying on the last day of the festival, the great day, while Jesus was standing there, he cried out, "Let anyone who's thirsty to me come to me, and I'm going to give him something to drink." These priests were going and dumping in this water to God, saying, "Please send rain." And all these people are watching all this water rush off. And Jesus says, "I have water. It flows living water." And so he's saying, I could offer you something that we're all wanting right now, because we're all feeling dry. We're all in a drought, and I got this for you. And he's using that imagery for the thing that he could offer to them, which is this beautiful, deep imagery of using the festival, this thing that they would do every year. And he's like, dude, we don't need to do this at a festival. I am the thing. I'm the better festival here. And because of me, we don't need to practice Sukkot anymore. You can practice Sukkot. There's nothing wrong with if you have a Jewish friend, if they celebrate it. There's nothing wrong with Jewish people practicing their festivals in their history, even if they're a Messianic Jew. There's nothing wrong with a Messianic Jewish person practicing, their tradition. Christianity isn't. You're not converting to Christianity. Think about it. If you're a Messianic Jew, you are following the Jewish Messiah. And Jesus came to these festivals. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. It's just, what is the point of it? You're not doing these festivals because you're finding your hope in that. It's like, oh, we're actually looking forward to something else, and we have it right now in Jesus. We don't need to live in the past anymore in it, even though we could remember our past. And so that's this great moment that Jesus demonstrates where he's saying, like, dude, I am this living water thing. I am going to be able to give you this thing that will sustain you. It's not just any kind of water, it's living water, which we've talked about for a few weeks. So Gary Burge, who I've used his commentary, he's the one who did a lot with bringing this idea out. I think I said, if I put this resource on the, I don't know if that's focusing or not. It doesn't look like it's focusing on my screen, but it's Jesus and the Festivals. This book is out of print, but you could buy the Kindle version still on Amazon. And I would highly encourage you, especially going through the next couple of weeks where we see some of these. This is a really easy book to read. There's not a lot to it, and this is going to give some more of that background information on some of the festival stuff. So that's a great thing to download and read on your Kindle or on your even on your computer if you want to do the Kindle app that way. And it will provide some of the background that I'm not filling in at this moment. Any thoughts or questions?
I was thinking about something because you were just talking about how if you're a Messianic Jew, you would probably still practice these festivals, but the intention would be different, right? Because
yes,
in this time, they're celebrating these festivals as a look forwards to what's to come. And Jesus is saying, you don't have to do that anymore because it's here. And so now if we're celebrating, it would be a look back, like a remembrance, almost kind of like a communion, like a remembrance of what has happened and promises that are still yet to be fulfilled.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. So one of the issues with Gentiles taking over Christianity, and that's just what happens when it spreads to the world where there's more Gentiles than Jewish people, we've turned it into a Gentile religion. And we need to remember the earliest Christians would have practiced this. Paul still would have participated in these festivals. James and John and Matthew, they would have participated in these festivals still. And so I don't think there's any reason to believe that they gave up their Jewishness because they became Christian. And so we need to think of that in the same kind of way where it's wrong of us to demand those things that they're celebrated. And there's nothing wrong with a Gentile Christian participating in some sort of way in these as well. It's not our history, but it's kind of, it's our history in the sense of, in the same way that I've participated in Portuguese festivals, even though I'm 0% Portuguese, but I'm married into that. Yeah. And so I've participated in more Portuguese festivals than maybe many Portuguese people. But that's because also I was a high school kid who was dating a really hot girl. And I'm like, sure, if you want me to do this, I will go to this thing with you, whatever. I don't know what you're saying, but I'll do it. And it worked out. So yeah. Hey, let's move on to a really interesting story. We're going to skip ahead a little bit here because we're going to come to chapter 7, verse 53, and then through chapter 8, verse 11. Look at your Bibles if you have them right away. And I just want to see, does your Bible note anything in this section? Are there brackets? Is there an asterisk? Is there anything in these sections, in the margins and the footnotes?
The earliest manuscripts do not include 753 through 811.
Yeah. Any other footnotes or any other commentaries from your Bible or anyone else's Bible that has a note on this?
Just the brackets. There's like the double brackets around it.
Yeah. What the heck do we do with this? Oh my gosh, we can't trust the Bible. So this is, sorry, I'm being dramatic. This is one of the longest, what we would call variants in the Bible. This is a section where most scholars, not all, it's split, but most scholars don't think that this is original to John's gospel. We won't spend a lot of time on this tonight. This is definitely a worthy conversation. And if you wanted to learn more about this, I'm just thinking about this on the fly, actually.
Vinny,
Yeah, go ahead while
out
I'm
of
looking this up.
curiosity, are these verses in the King James?
Yes, but
They are?
yeah, great question. But in the King James, the difference is they're not going to contain that bracket or that warning. It's going to be like, nope, these are just here.
Okay.
Yep.
I have an aunt that reads nothing but the King James. And
Yeah.
if it's anything else, it's wrong.
Yes. And so, yeah, a King James only position is definitely going to be pretty, pretty stringent on this one.
Jim and Nancy, she lives in Missouri. You should hook up with her.
I've talked with many of King James onlyists in my life, and they are colorful conversations in many
Correct.
ways. They're never the same conversation. They're always different conversations, but they're usually fun. Last year, I taught a Sunday class on this, on how we got the Bible. I just want to check to see if that's still up. Where was that? Class notes. Maybe this class lectures. Okay, they've kept it up. So on the website, theologyclass.org, if you go to, actually, I'll do this real quick. Let me share again. Screens. So if you go to the homepage and then you go on to classes, this tab right here, it just shows like all the classes I've done in the past. If you go down to Know How We Got Our Bible 2023, I taught a class on like the history of the Bible from just how did the people write, and we talked about translations all the way through. Well, where's the this kind of? I don't want to download it. I just want to. Oh crap! How come it downloads it right away? That's probably a new thing to change. Anyway, it goes through like basically how we got the Bible all the way up to modern day stuff. So on this, if you click on class lectures, you're seeing the YouTube playlist now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So this has all the classes by week, and it has a generic idea of what we did that class. So this was, it also utilized a book called Know How We Got the Bible that I have linked in there, which is a really good book to read. It's like not scholarly. It's totally like layperson level. I don't remember if anyone in here took that class last year. Patty, were you in that class? You might've been in that one. You were in that one? Maybe. I don't even know if I don't remember if I was in it either. But I mean, I might've been there, but I don't know if I was there, if you know what I mean. But each one of these weeks talks about the topic that we did. And so like, this is like, okay, how do we get the Old Testament? What is the Apocrypha and the Septuagint? The New Testament earliest Christians? What is the Latin Vulgate? And then we started talking about like the medieval world. Once we probably would have talked about it here, maybe even here. These 2 weeks, the King James Bible, and then week 11, the development of modern translations. That's when we would have talked, probably, maybe even bled into this week, like why there's those differences there. I don't remember, it was like a year ago, but I'm pretty sure I'm guessing that's probably where we would have talked about those things. And so reasons why there's differences in Bible translations and that sort of thing, it definitely pops up in those type of questions. Or those type of lectures. So if you want to study that topic more, like the lectures are there and all the notes, like the classes, it's formatted just like this one. So you could see that if you're interested. But to give you a quick version of what do we do with this, let me come back on my screen here. Bada bing, bada boom. Where did the chat go? Okay. So what do we do with this? So here's the thing. Chances are this is probably an account of Jesus. So it's probably a true thing that happened. The question is, did John write it, and did he originally have it in his gospel? So it does. I don't think it's original to John because it doesn't really read like John's stories do. This is it kind of reads like the other interactions, like maybe actually it's contained in Luke's gospel in another ancient manuscript. It interrupts the flow of of this dialogue, because we're reading in chapter 7 and all of a sudden we have this woman caught in adultery, and then it goes back to the story of Jesus being the light of the world. It like doesn't really make sense. It totally interrupts the flow. So it's probably not original to John, but it probably is a true, authentic Jesus story, which is fine, because guess what? Even in the gospel, or not the gospel, in the book of Acts, Jesus is quoted one time there, and it's like, oh, remember, like Jesus said, it's better to give than receive. When did he ever say that? There's sayings of Jesus out there that in events that didn't make it into his gospel or into the gospels, and those other things are out there. So this probably isn't original to John. It's fine. It's like it's never been doubted as an authentic Christian, like Jesus story. So there's nothing wrong with it. It probably just didn't originally exist here. But let's go through it real quickly. It's known as, oops, I don't want that. It's known in its Latin name is the pericope adulterae. The pericope is just a term to use like a short section of something, like a self-contained story is a pericope. Like a discourse would be another way of calling it. So it's the short story about adultery. That's why they call it that. And I forget if I have notes for you guys on this one. So then each of them went home. Well, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery. So, do it that way. Scribes and Pharisees, a woman who had been caught in adultery, and making her stand before all of them. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the very act of committing adultery, which is a capital crime." Now, in the law, in Torah, Moses commands us to stone such woman. Now, what do you say? They're trying to test him, right? So that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and he wrote with his finger on the ground. One thing we don't want to do, we don't want to this is one of those arguments from silence. It's conjecture. Don't say, and this is what he wrote. And he started writing all of their sins down. No one knows what he wrote. Like many sermons are preached on the thing that was wrote here on the ground. No one knows. He wrote something. No one knows. Other things might preach well, but there's no other indication to know what he wrote. So we don't want to make a big deal out of what that was. Let's see, where are we at? Verse 6. So Jesus went down and wrote with his finger on the ground. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and he said to them, Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And at once he bent down and wrote on the ground. So he's writing something that's significant, but we don't know what it is. When they heard it, they all went away one by one, beginning with the elders, and Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So this is actually a fantastic story. And I don't mean story in a false way, but a fantastic account, again, of how Jesus is engaging women, and another example of how women in the first century world were utterly oftentimes used as a pawn in a story or just dehumanized. When we look at the story, here's some things. She's accused of a capital crime. We have every reason to believe it's true. So it's not like it was a false accusation, which if it was a false accusation, they would be actually guilty of the punishment they're accusing themselves. So in the Jewish law, if you falsely accuse someone of something and it's proved that it's false, you actually get the punishment that would have been due to them. That's not the case here. It seems to be true. Here's a question though. This woman was caught in adultery. How was she caught? People are pretty smart when they practice infidelity. They must have known that something was happening, which means they knew and they didn't go to stop her. They didn't go to stop him. They were actually waiting for her to do this. Why? So she could be used in order to trap Jesus. So where is the care for this woman? How come the man isn't involved in here? How come he's not involved in this process as well? How come she's the only one who is being viewed as the guilty one? Where's the dude? You can't have an affair with yourself. Where's the problem here? So why is she treated so poorly here? But seriously, where this is the elders, the scribes, the Pharisees, these are the top religious people. And instead of stopping these people from sinning, they allowed them to go through with it so then they could be caught and used as a pawn to serve their political motives. Because that's what this is. This is a political thing. It's a political fight at this thing. How often do we see people in power allow other people to be pawns in a situation? And this happens. Don't just think, oh yeah, the dirty politicians. Yeah, of course it happens for the politicians. Why wouldn't they? How else are you going to get ahead in life? We expect them to do it. How often does this sort of thing still happen in churches across the world, where the shepherds who are supposed to be shepherding are allowing something to happen in order for something else that they think is going to serve their purpose, that's going to help their cause? And in their mind, they probably think it's a noble thing that they're doing, but they're allowing people to first off sin. And a lot of times it's not even allowing people to sin. It's just allowing them to be victims of something. And that's awful. That's not what shepherds are supposed to do. That's not what these people were supposed to be doing. It's another example of Jesus bringing judgment and doing the right thing. And he saves this woman from capital punishment, because guess what? Shame on them. If you're going to bring her up on a capital crime, man, you're the one who should be brought up on something worse. And he even shows them compassion by just allowing them to go. This isn't to say that all crime should be, that there shouldn't be punishment and there shouldn't be justice. There should be. But the first and foremost thing is, what do you see Jesus doing? He's bringing justice. He's doing the right thing. But it's for the care of, first and foremost, this nameless woman. Okay? And oftentimes, to use this as an analogy, oftentimes we have justice-oriented people, because she was doing something wrong. It's not their duty to have to stop her. She could make her own big girl decisions. That's a very American way of thinking about it, right? Like, it's not my job to do it. I mean, they're almost like viewing themselves. We view ourselves as like documentary cameramen who we go in the wilderness and it's like, oh, this poor little baby bunny is going to get eaten by a whatever. And it's like, you want to save the bunny? It's like, nope, I'm just the documentarian. My job's just to capture it, right? I can't intervene with nature. Well, we should intervene with nature in some ways to protect the innocent. And that's what is happening. What's not happening here. But think about it. We have justice-oriented people who oftentimes see something and they want to go after the perpetrator. They want to go after something that's wrong. And that's good. We should want to go after an abusive person. But especially, and I see this in the church, and I'm not speaking about, I've seen this in multiple churches. So this is one of those times where I'm not like subtweeting, as the cool kids say it. I guess you can't say tweet anymore. Sub-Xing, whatever you call it. We oftentimes have a policeman mentality. It's like this. You see a cop or you see a drunk driver and he smashed into some cars, caused horrific terror. So you have the cop who's going after this guy, and I'm going to get this guy and I'm going to make sure we stop him. And I'm going to make sure that all my paperwork is just spectacular because this guy is going to get prosecuted. And that's justice. That should happen. But how often do we talk about and think about then the person who was hit and who's on the side of the road right now, and they're going to need months of rehab to learn how to walk again, and their whole life is upside down? Who's attending to them? It's the EMT, it's the ER doctor, and then for months it's the physical therapists. Oftentimes, especially in the church, we think that justice is going after the person doing the wrong thing, which we should have justice. We should stop sin. We should stop definitely injustice when it comes to abuse. But how often do we have the EMT physical therapist mindset? And I see what you have here with Jesus is he sees the trap that's being set. And more importantly than having accountability for someone who is involved in adultery, which there should be accountability there, he was being first and foremost a physical therapist and giving care here and saying, hey, don't use her as a pawn. If you're going to use her as a pawn, we're not going to give her the consequence. Because you're dehumanizing this person at this point. You're not trying to bring justice and righteousness in the way that the law was intended. So anyway, there is beauty in this story in terms of how Jesus treats people who, like, sin is confronted. And we even see as we read along in the story, one by one, they begin to leave the woman alone, and Jesus straightened up and he said to the woman, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No one, sir." And Jesus says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go your way from now on and don't sin again." So he had care for this woman. It's not like, "Hey, I got you out of this one, and if it happens again," it's like, no, just stop doing this. Live righteously. So he cares about the woman, but he also cares about justice and treating people right. And he wasn't going to dehumanize her by just allowing her to be used as a pawn in this scheme. So it's a beautiful story because it shows us, hey, how do we treat people, especially within the people of God? And what should be the posture of religious leaders when it comes to sin? Yeah, we take sin seriously. But how are we actually being physical therapists with people as well? Or are we just trying to be cops all the time? And we need to have both, but it can't just be one or the other. If you only have physical therapists, you never have, phrases like this don't exist, right? And so you need to have both equally. So anyway, it's still a beautiful story. It's relevant. I think it's a Jesus saying. Does it belong in John's gospel? Probably not, but that's okay. And we'll see. Yeah.
I want to read you from Schofield, the reference Bible, what they put down here is, although John 7:53 to 8:11 is not found in some ancient manuscripts, the immediate context, beginning with Christ's declaration, "I am the light of the world," seems clearly to have its occasion in the conviction wrought in the hearts of the Pharisees, as recorded in 8:9, and also helps explain the Pharisees' words in 8:41. It is, therefore, to be considered a genuine part of the gospel.
And that would be one of the reasons why, one argument for why it would be seen as original. And there's scholars that go back and forth on that.
Yep.
I don't think it's original because what happens right after this story? Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, and he gets into, "I am the light of the world."
Yeah.
This takes us immediately back to the story of tabernacles. And this is where we just don't really know the imagery of what happens. Remember how I had mentioned how buckets of water are brought up every day during the feast, and on the great day you do this 7 times, and the courtyard is gushing with water. Well, guess what? There's another amazing element about this as well, and it's the light that is used during this ceremony. So think about it. There's times where power goes out. And I remember a couple years ago, the power went out at our house, and you try to go to bed at night and it's just weird because all those, just even the hum, the electronic hum that you get from something, or maybe your ceiling fan, that's all gone and is so silent. And for us, it was weird because it was a dark night where it wasn't a full moon like tonight. And so it's very dark, but we have an alarm system. And so the keypad, that's running on a battery backup. And so the little green light, or the red light, that's what it was. The house was armed. That is illuminating the whole room, right? It's dude, that's way too bright now. It just because it's the only brightness that happens. Or when normally it's just you don't even know that the light's there. You have alarm clocks on, you have, just whatever lights that exist, street lights that have light pollution that come in. So imagine living in a village, in a town, in Jerusalem, wherever you're at. And when it gets dark at night, it's dark. There is no light. And so you're used to it. Just sundown happens, you go home and you light a lamp and you have to decide, how much oil do I want to burn tonight? Do I want to waste my oil? How much do I have? How much money do I have to buy more oil? Did I run out of oil? It's just not going to stay light very long, especially in this part of the year. Think about it for us. Last night, Michelle and Mateo went on a walk, and it was it's 6:45. If we want to go on a walk, we got to go right now. And it was already getting dark. Okay. So it gets dark early, which means it's dark a long time, that's not too fun during a festival. So here's what happens. During the festival time, they would have these giant basins or, containers, bowls, call them bowls, giant bowls that they would set up. There's 16 of them in the different corners of the temple. They would fill them with oil. And then what they would do is, the idea is that garb and the clothing that's used by the priests, they wouldn't throw those away because these are holy garb. So they would use those as wicks. And during the festival, remember, this is up on a mountain because you're in, this is where the temple is going to be at. you would have all these giant bowls of oil, and you have these wicks, and you would light them, and it just illuminates everything. And since it's up high, it illuminates like the whole city in a sense. This is one of the few times when you're seeing light at night. This is a huge deal. It used to be the way fireworks existed back before, like in the East County. It's like, oh, it's like, dude, it's the October the 12th. Let's like fireworks. You know, they just happen all the time now. And Vanita knows all about this because she's a narc for Oakley PD, right? You guys running those drones and stuff. So thank God for people like you. But it's one of those things where, like, as a kid, you literally only saw fireworks like on 4th of July if your city did them. I lived in Fremont. They didn't have them. So 4th of July, or if you go to Disneyland, or if you go to Great America, and like that's when you could see fireworks. It's a huge deal. Imagine this, light at night. This is a huge deal. So Jesus not only has this encounter, and this is why, Patty, I think this section, starting at verse 12, goes along with the previous section. We just had Jesus engaged the festival where he used water imagery to describe, hey, I'll give you living water. Just like all this water that we're pouring out, hoping God brings, I actually have that for you, but it's better than that. What do we have here? At the same event, it's nighttime, you have this festival, you have the lights lighting up the city. This is a huge deal. People are just loving this. And what does Jesus say? I am the light of the world. He's saying this with the imagery of what's happening in Jerusalem right now. This isn't merely like Christianese. This isn't like a Sunday school song. He's using the imagery of what they're seeing in the moment that would be practiced at the feast. And he's saying, I'm actually the light of the world right now. It's not this. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but you will have the light of life, which is, this goes back to the prologue. He is the light. We've seen light and darkness imagery all throughout the story so far. Then the Pharisee said to him, you are testifying on your own behalf, right? Your testimony is not valid, which we've come to expect this now. We know to see this, and we know that, yeah, your guys' charge is lame. He's already has had testimony. It comes from above. Jesus answered, even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid because I know where I've come from and where I'm going. Same thing that he said earlier. But you do not know where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I judge no one. Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is valid, for it is not I who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. Oh. Once again, blasphemy. Blasphemous statement. He's once again making himself equal with God. In your law, in the Torah, it's written that the testimony of two witnesses is valid. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me testifies on my behalf. Then they said to him, where is your Father? Jesus answered, you know neither me or my Father. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. He spoke these words while he was teaching in the treasury of the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not come. Remember, all these phrases that we've seen. John's continuing this story that it's like, oh, and it's not yet. And that same theme is popping up that he's expressing. So once again, a deity claim. I am the light of the world, not just, that's so common Christian imagery. It's in songs. It's in little kids' rhymes that you could, sing and all those sort of things. Yes, that's true. But what was the context? How would Jewish people have understood that phrase when Jesus first uttered those words? I am the light of the world. He's using Feast of Tabernacle imagery. Okay, imagine right now. Let's imagine that Sukkot is happening right now tonight. Imagine all the lights go out, and there's only one light in your neighborhood. Only one house has power, and people are flocking to that house. And it's like it's using that like, hey, you guys like this light? I am the light of the world. Like I'm actually going to give ultimate light, even in the darkness. Like this is the claim that Jesus is making here. So he goes on again. He said to them, I am going away, and you will search for me, but you will die in your sins. Where I am going, you cannot come. Meaning, you can't enter the kingdom of God. You're not part of that because you're in the darkness. Then the Jews said to him, is he going to kill himself? Is that what he means by saying, where I am going, you cannot come? He said to them, you are from below, I am from above. You are of this world, I am not of this world. Don't think of this as dualism. Don't think of this as earthly, like physical earth and spatial outer space. This is just a terminology to describe, below, this world, above, not of this world. These are ways of talking about the realm of the devil and the realm of God, the kingdom of the devil and the kingdom of God. So I'm not of this world, meaning my government doesn't come from this worldly type of thinking. I don't rule in the way that rulers of this world rule. It doesn't have its origin from human people. The kingdom of heaven is here now. So it's not, don't think of it in like a dualism, like outer space, or like he lives on the top floor of the building and they live on the bottom floor. Like that's not what he's meaning when he's using this imagery. Let's see, he died for sins, verse 25. They said to him, "Who are you?" Jesus said to them, "Why do I speak to you at all? I have much to say about you and much to condemn, but the one who sent me is true, and I declare to the world what I have heard from him." They did not understand that he was speaking to them about the Father. So Jesus said, "When you have lifted up the Son of Man," so that's one of those phrases to remember, lifted up, like ascended the Son of Man, "then you will realize that I am he, and that I can do nothing on my own. But I speak these things as the Father instructed me. And the one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what is pleasing to him." As he was saying these things, many believed. So people are getting it. Like, people are going into the light as they're hearing this, but the religious leaders are not. I'm going to move on just to, because this discourse is really long. Remember, John engages in very long discourses between Jesus and other people. Then Jesus said to the Jews who believed in him. So remember, it's not the Jews are bad. It's like, no, when he often refers to the Jews, it's Jewish religious leaders. These are just the other ones who are around. The Jews who believed in him. "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples." Which is saying, if you continue. We often get hung up in the concept of once saved, always saved, and those kind of theological arguments. And I think once we read John 6 last week, and the idea was like, hey, no one comes to me unless the Father draws him, and if the Father draws you, you will come to me, and my job is to not lose them. Like, I think that's true statements. Okay, but we don't want to reduce Christianity down to, I said a prayer, therefore I'm fine. There's an idea of saying, no, if I have been drawn, I'm going to continue in this, right? And so that it's like, most of you are old, except for Shelby, he's a little baby. But most of us old farts, we remember the comedian Sam Kinison, right, from the 80s, right? Come on, Patty, you were a big Sam Kinison fan. I know you listen to all that dirty comedy. But Sam Kinison was this notorious, like, 1980s comedian, like foul mouth, all this kind of stuff. What was his profession prior to being a comedian? Do you know? He's a Pentecostal preacher. Okay, like, seriously, you even find his sermons on YouTube now. It's crazy. I heard one the other day, and I'm like, I'm waiting for because he would scream and stuff all the time. None of that happened. He was very animated. But the idea is, like, if someone truly believes, they're going to continue on in the faith. There are some people who say they believe and then they step away. And it's not our job to go around judging who's in and who's out. I think their fruit demonstrates that. But there is, while evangelicalism and Protestantism does a good job of saying, hey, by faith alone. Yes, by faith alone. But faith doesn't stay alone. And that's the thing, it's continuing in your word. And so this is the point that Jesus makes. If you continue in my word, not meaning just reading the Bible, but because that's not what he doesn't mean the word like his Bible. It's his truth, the truth of Jesus. Then you are my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. They answered him, we are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to everyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free? Jesus answered them, very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. Remember, because the world has already condemned him. They're already walking in the darkness, is what we read in the prologue. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. Meaning, hey, you could claim that you're the son of Abraham. That doesn't mean anything, though. Like, you're not in by race. Verse 36, so if the son makes you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are descendants of Abraham, yet you look for an opportunity to kill me because there is no place for you in my word. meaning I'm not doing the political things that you want me to do. I'm not setting up the kingdom that you want to be set up. I declare what I have seen in the Father's presence. As for you, you should do what you have heard from the Father. Meaning, why don't you see me in the Old Testament? Moses has already written about me. They answered him, Abraham is our father. Jesus said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing what Abraham did. But now you are trying to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I hear from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are indeed doing what your father does. They said to him, we are not illegitimate children. We have one Father, God himself. Jesus said to them, if God were your father, you would love me. For I came from God, and now I am here. I did not come on my own, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot accept my word. Why? Because they're already condemned for John 3. They're already living in the darkness, John 1. You are your father. You are from your father, the devil. Remember, father and son relationships, you're like that one. You know, get behind me, son of Satan. Right? It's not that you're literally that. It's you're acting just like your father, Satan would, and so you're like his lineage. And you chose to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks according to his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell you the truth, or I tell the truth, you don't believe me. Which of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is from God hears the words of God. The reason you do not hear them is that you are not from God. And then we'll be able to wrap up with this. The Jews answered him, are we not right in saying that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Right? It's like, what? You ever get in a conflict with someone and they're just trying to throw all the crap against the wall to see what sticks? It's like, huh? Jesus answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. Yet I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks it, and he is the judge. Very truly, I tell you, whoever keeps my word will never see death. The Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham died, and so did the prophets. Yet you say, whoever keeps my word will never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham who died? So once again, they're still claiming that they're of Abraham, right? They're saying because of our lineage, we have a certain position. The prophets also died. Who do you claim to be? Once again, it's the question, who are you? What's your identity? Jesus answered, if I glorify myself, my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me. He of whom you say he is our God, though you do not know him. But I know him. Once again, that's the prologue. He knows him. He has made him known. Jesus has made him known. If I were to say that I do not know him, I would be a liar like you. But I do know him, and I keep his word. Your ancestor Abraham rejoiced that he would see my day. He saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you are not 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? Jesus said to them, very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, I am. So they picked up stones to throw at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. So it's this big argument of who do you belong to? Who are you allegiance in? Who are you acting like? And it's either the devil or Abraham. And it's funny, Jesus doesn't claim to be of Abraham. He's like, no, my father is God. You're claiming that Abraham's your father. You don't get to claim God's your father. You claim that Abraham's your father. You're actually the sons of the devil. And how could you have known Abraham? You weren't even born yet. This speaks to his pre-existence. And this is one of those things that just can't be translated very well into English. Very truly, I tell you, before Abraham was, meaning before he existed, I am. And this is where it's going to the idea of what we saw in the Greek. Remember how we talked about there's a Greek Old Testament that was what's called produced around the 200s. Okay, so the Old Testament's written in Hebrew, and when you get to Exodus chapter 3, I was gonna have a text. I didn't have a slide up for this. When you get to Exodus chapter 3, Moses is like, hey, God, you're telling me to go to Egypt. Who should I say sent me? Because you have to speak the name of the God. You can't just go and say, oh, this deity sent me. You need to speak the name of the God to evoke its power. And that's where we get that famous line. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And God said, say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. And that word I am, In the Greek in the Hebrew, it's Yahweh. It's basically a form of Yahweh. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, they didn't write Yahweh because that's a Hebrew word. So they had to find a way to translate it into Greek. And this is the first translation of the Bible. And so what they did is the word Yahweh is actually a form of the Hebrew word to be. It'd be easier if you could raise hands here. But if you've ever learned a foreign language, the verb to be is probably the most difficult verb to learn because there's so many variations of it. Okay. So in English, to be is like I am, I was, I will be, is like any of those forms, like the thing that you're doing, like to be. There's just so many variations of that verb. So in Hebrew, God, when Moses says, "Who are you?" God uses the Hebrew form of the verb to be, but he uses it in the indefinite form. So we could have a to be like I was eating dinner tonight, and then I came here. We only have one was in English, right? And it could be indefinite, or it could be like there could be a point of time. I was eating dinner. You know that, oh, that probably happened a couple hours ago. Hebrew has a was in the indefinite form, which you can't put time on. You can't associate it at like a certain point in time. Context is only going to tell you that. It's actually the Hebrew verb hayah. So you remember it like karate, like hayah. It sounds just like that. In Greek, you have a similar form of that verb. And so what they actually did was the Greek writers, when they translated Exodus, they used the two forms of the Greek verb to mean like an indefinite action verb. And so they used the word ego and I, me. And it's I am, but each one of those means I am. And they just put them both together to kind of make them emphatic. So ego, I, me doesn't actually mean I am. It means I am. It's saying the same thing twice. But that's the way Exodus 3 would have read in the Greek translation of the Bible. Hopefully you're following me this. So it would have read ego, I, me. So Jesus is quoting Exodus 3 before Abraham was, and then he refers to himself as ego, I, me. He's referring to himself as the identification for Yahweh in the Old Testament based on the Greek scriptures, which would have been the common scriptures of the first century. Anytime the New Testament writers quote the Old Testament, they use the Septuagint, that Greek translation that was used. So this is a commonly known way of speaking back then, which is fascinating. It obviously struck a tone with them because they picked up stones to kill him. So they get what's happening, that he's identifying himself as God, and so they want to stone him on the charge of blasphemy here. And so this is a huge deal here. And this is one of the more popular examples of the deity of Christ and Jesus claiming deity in the Gospel of John. Anyway, that was a lot of stuff. We went through a lot of stuff, and I probably rushed through a lot, and it's already a little late. But do you have any questions or ideas or anything that you would want to ask tonight? And there's probably be better conversations if we were in a classroom, I know, but I'll give it a second to drink. Nothing? You guys got nothing. Everything I said made sense totally. Wow. Freaking amazing.
The context makes sense. And the way you're bringing it about to us makes very good sense for understanding of the material.
Cool. Good. And hopefully, like, if you've been in church a long time, you've heard a sermon probably on John 8:58. Like, we're familiar with the terms like light of the world. We're familiar with the terms of living water and that sort of thing. I mean, churches are named after that, right? But do we know the context of these things always? And it's the background that really brings these things to life. And our thing is, the more we could hear these as the original audience would have, and in this case, this is a very Jewish gospel, the more we could understand this and hear this as a Jewish person living in the first century, the deeper it's going to be. And many of you are seasoned saints. Many of you are people who have been in the church longer than I've been alive. I know you guys know these stories better than I know these stories. But we often don't hear the context of them. And that's where it's like, man, we know how great this stuff is just reading on a surface level. Once you could grow that context, oh man, there's so much more. I mean, we'd spend weeks and weeks on each one of these chapters. Yeah. So any other thoughts or questions? Yolanda's still there. Hopefully, how's your volleyball game doing, Yolanda? She's not even listening anymore. Yeah.
She's
All right,
reading
guys.
to your lips.
Hey, hopefully she didn't leave it on and she's in the car right now and she crashed or something. So
I am listening. I just
Okay.
couldn't get to my
man.
screen fast enough to unmute.
okay. Good. Well, I hope you drive safe wherever you're coming back from.
Yeah, Danville.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely drive safe. Good. Well, hey, everyone. Hopefully this was edifying. Next week we will be in, like I said, we're going to continue in, it's going to be another huge chunk just 'cause, I mean, there's so much discourse here. So it's going to be chapters 9 through 12, 9, 10, 11, so 4 chapters. And we probably won't read each section, like every verse. So be a little familiar with it and we'll look at some highlights of the passage. But just start asking, always ask those questions. You don't need to come into this knowing answers. Just ask questions like just always think that how would a Jewish person heard this? What would a first audience member, what would they have thought when they heard this story? And I think that's going to help us just understand the story a little better. Just ask the questions. And this is stuff that we don't know. So we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what to look for. But this will just get us in maybe that will even be a good thing to say, okay, would it be this? Would it be this? And then we're not going to cover everything, but maybe when we do cover it, it's like, oh, okay, I was asking the right question here. And so that's just a good way of learning as well. So cool. Father, thank you for being a Lord of light who gives us light in darkness and water in times of thirst. So thank you for the times that we're thirsty and dark and we could tangibly experience the light and the water. And thank you for the times where we're dark and thirsty and we're not experiencing those, but we know that you are still providing that. So sustain us through those times, allow us to be people who continue to believe, who are continually believing the word of Jesus, and allow us to be lights to the world just as Jesus is, allow us to be salt to the world just as Jesus is, so that people will see us and that will be a good reflection on who you are. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 All right, folks, I hope you all have a good week.
You too.
Thank you, Vinnie.
You as
Yeah.
well. Thanks, Vinnie.
Okay.
All right, see you guys.
Okay.
Right.
Good night.
Bye.
Yeah.